morning, everybody, and welcome to the first Football Transfer Forum of 2021. Tony, I was meant to be getting on a flight this morning to go to Iceland, but I have to say, you know, this is a close second being here again with you. So fantastic to see you. As always, we've got a great selection of guests and panelists with us today, and I'll give a brief introduction to those guys in a minute. But first up, Tony, welcome to 2021. I wish it was 2001. How are you feeling? How are things?
Well, Ryan, I'm absolutely fantastic. I'm great. I'm really positive for this new year. I've made my first 2 signings of the January window. That's you and Guy hooked into the transfer forum for the whole year. 1 year deals. Year deals, Guy. You must be happy with that, surely, that 1 year deal. No? I don't know whether you noticed, but there was an option for a second year in there as well. I don't think you read the small print, did you?
You've hid that in the small print, did you, on the schedule?
I told you you need somebody like David to look over these things before you sign.
An agent, to be fair.
I'm so, joking aside, I'm so pleased that we've decided to run right through the whole year with the Football Transfer Forum, the first Thursday in every month. So hopefully you'll tune in, and it's some insight, some support in these times as well for everyone in the football industry.
Fantastic, thanks, Tony. Before I introduce our guest, it's hi to Guy again. Hello, Guy. I've always got to come and talk to you about Leicester, and I've got to. We were joking just off air just prior, but the training ground just looks absolutely phenomenal at Leicester. Just, you know, have you been down? And more importantly, as we talked about before, have you been in the jacuzzi yet? Because that looks okay. Well,
with COVID regulations, I'm 32 miles away, and I don't think I'm getting any closer yet. So we were supposed to have 3 inductions over the last 3 weeks previous, and we've tried to get in the building for induction, but still not allowed in yet. The phenomenal. I've drove past it a few times because it's not too far away from me, but it looks unbelievable on the videos. The first team's there. I've got to go in actually this afternoon. Do some paperwork, do some documentation, fingerprinting and stuff, and they're literally slowly but surely getting us in one by one to be really, really safe and sound because of obviously the COVID and the strains, and they don't want it. And the building's that big and the facility's that big that they can do it quietly from one side of the 90 pitches to the other. So there's a lot of free room and a lot of areas to hit and put people in. So it looks amazing.
Guy, you're making Steve jealous there. He sat there. I think he had 2 pictures back in the day with Steve, didn't there? I remember going down there. There was a couple of pictures, wasn't there?
Oh, you're just on mute, Steve.
On mute. Yeah, we had 1, 2, 3, basically 3 pitches on the main, and then we had a few over the other side.
You didn't even go up top, did you, Steve? You didn't even go up top. It was too far.
Staff 5-a-sides. Staff 5-a-sides. That was it.
Can I say, a lot of the new training ground, and I ain't just bumping him up here because he's here, but a lot of the new training ground facilities is what Steve was about. If we hadn't been involved in that, obviously winning the league, we may not have even got into this new venue. So thank you, Steve, for that. I actually reap the benefits, but Steve was a big part of that. So thanks for coming on, but also thanks for being part of my journey as well. I appreciate it.
Guy, no problems, Guy.
You've never mentioned that you won the league at Leicester before. When was that? I can't really remember that. Can you, Ryan? It must have been a while back.
I can't, but I'm going to grapple back some control already. It's already gone wild. So Steve Walsh, absolutely fantastic for you to be here with us. Steve, now senior consultant at Charlotte, one of the new MLS clubs. We're going to be hearing from Steve about when they're going to potentially be entering the MLS as well. And also, it's a big welcome to David Seligman, solicitor at Brandsmiths. Good morning, David. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well. How's your Christmas and New Year been?
Yeah, very, very nice, very nice. Nice rest ahead of what we hope will be a busier month than I actually think it will be.
Absolutely. And before we get into the nitty gritty of stuff, David, we've got to say you're a Bury fan. I just think it'd be interesting just to have a few words on where Bury are at the moment and how the club, obviously a really difficult first season for what is the Phoenix club.
I mean, how long have you got?
What, about 30 seconds, mate?
Well, Bury Football Club Limited, that owned Bury Football Club, have only just been placed into administration just about 2 years nearly after we were expelled from the Football League. So that is in the control of the administrators. I understand there are people interested in buying that. Whether that's viable or not, I don't know. In the meantime, a group of fans have very admirably set up a new club, which I, as a fan, view as a continuation of Bury Football Club, which is Bury AFC, competing in the lowest level of football in England and atop of the league. Obviously got a bigger budget than everyone else, but not going silly like the owners of Bury FC, which put us in the position that we ended up being in. And to be honest, we've been in a fortunate position, Bury fans, that we've been able to go and watch live football, which is what many fans haven't been able to do. In fairness, we were starved of it for a long time. So hopefully the guys who are doing a great job with that will keep doing, and you'll see a team from Bury back in the Football League within the next 10 years, fingers crossed.
Oh, there you go. Well, it's great to have you with David with us, and we're going to be speaking with David a little bit later on about some of these governing body exemptions and what it's going to mean for work permits in terms of getting players into the country. But let's go through the full agenda, and we can also just mention to our company who's in profile with us today as well. So here we go. So we're going to start off with Steve very shortly. Let me just click that. There we go. And we're going to be really trying to pick Steve's brain about how one goes about managing the January transfer window. Both as a sporting director, as a club, and then extending out to sort of agents and players as well. We're really fortunate to be joined by the guys from AI Abacus today and Ramm. And they're the company that's going to be the company insight today in the middle at about 10 past 11. Some of you may have seen some of the work that they're doing. They've been pushing it quite strongly across some of the platforms. It's really, really interesting. Really interesting as it leads into David's talk as well, because one of the things that they've come up with is a tool to see how suited foreign players are for getting one of these GBEs as well. So that's really, really interesting. And then we're going to go through in some detail with David about what the situation is. I'm not sure if we've got Sam Allardyce tuning in today, Tony, but as we've already seen, there's a little bit of sort of frustration really on what the realities of the Brexit deal has meant for bringing players into.
Yeah. I mean, Big Sam was in the media that 3 of his transfer targets for this January, obviously at West Brom, he couldn't now get because of the governing body endorsement scheme. So apparently it was, Yuri Djorkaeff, Ivan Campo and Jussi Askelainen no longer qualify. So that really was a big dent in the plans early doors.
Yeah. Very good. Very good. All right, okay. Keep on with it. Good stuff. But let's introduce Steve, and we'll get cracking with that. So, Steve, it's great to have you on. I hope you've had a good Christmas and New Year. I think my first question to you is, obviously you're at home in England and not over in the States. What can you tell us about what's happening with Charlotte and when we can expect to see them playing in the MLS?
I thought you were going to ask me about the current situation, about the riots that are happening on Capitol Hill.
It's the next question.
That's the next, yeah. Well, obviously, I'm not in the States, and haven't been for some considerable time now because it's impossible to travel. But originally, Charlotte were supposed to be going into the MLS in March of this year. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic and all the implications that have occurred, we have decided as a club to put it back 12 months. So we're not actually going in the league now till 2022. Obviously, we've had to put a lot of resources into this, which we have done. At the moment, we were due to use the Bank of America Stadium in Charlotte, which is a 75,000 seater capacity. And as you can imagine, the loss of revenue from NFL games for a start off, because the guy who owns Charlotte is a chap called Dave Tepper. Dave is also the owner of Carolina Panthers. So that is the stadium that we will be using initially. There are plans for us to build our own stadium, our own soccer, as they call it. I have to differentiate between football and soccer, because we would get a really mixed bag if we didn't. So the soccer stadium and the soccer training ground we're all in the pipeline and ready to move on. What we've had to do is we've had to hold up the appointment of the coach, stroke manager. We've had to hang back on obviously recruiting players. Yep. We have bought 2 players who are on loan at the moment. One is on loan at Birmingham City, Riley McGree, and Sergio Ruiz is he is on loan at Las Palmas in the 2nd division Spanish league. But obviously we've not pursued that any further. And if we do buy any players in the summer window, it will be at the basically what we'll have to do is we'll have to loan those players until we need them. We will only be starting to do pre-season in January of 2022. Just get me years mixed up, a bit like yourself, Ryan.
That's fine.
So that's basically where we're at. My role is to support our sporting director, our director of football, who is Zoran Kranata. A lot of you might know a guy called Tom Glick. Tom was involved at Derby County and also at Manchester City, or his previous clubs. He's now the president of Carolina Panthers and also helps with the transition to get the franchise in the MLS sorted as well. So he's got a good background in football. So it was Tom and Zoran who brought me in as a special advisor to help with management and recruitment consultancy, basically, which is a job that I've enjoyed so far, but most of it's been done remotely. If I've been looking at players, it's been online, which has been difficult and goes against the grain a lot in some of the stuff that I believe in. You do need to see players live to get a feeling for them, so it makes it more difficult. But that is the situation at the moment.
And I think that's a nice sort of segue into the conversation this morning about how clubs are going to go about tackling the January transfer window. Because first up, there's going to be a sort of an issue where they've not been able to go and see them live. And I mean, so you know, what's your take on what this January window is going to look like here domestically?
Well, I don't think there's an awful lot happening, Ryan. Looking at actually the amount of business that's been done so far, it's pretty minimal, which suggests to me that teams are not ready to invest in new talents. And my take on it is that a lot of clubs, I think, are kind of sticking with what they've got until they can see the way out of the pandemic.
Ryan, sorry, Steve. I've just shared the BBC's latest the football website for the BBC the latest transfers that have gone through, and it's just a massive case of loan. I don't think there's any money changed hand whatsoever, Steve.
Yeah, and I think that's the fear factor that a lot of clubs have. It's okay for Premier League clubs in some ways because the revenue streams are still there. Yeah. But with the clubs that are relying on people coming through the turnstiles, it's just been so damaging to their livelihoods that they can't really see further than survival. And I think that's what a lot of clubs are actually in at the moment, which is survival mode. So actually investing in the squad is very, very difficult. If you're a manager of one of those clubs, you know the dire straits in terms of the overall picture. And for you to be asking for funds for transfers, whilst there may be some bargains out there, it's going to be very difficult for clubs to compete and be able to bring players in.
The January transfer window has always been this, nobody seems to have really, there's no sort of pattern really in terms of how it's gone in January. It's been always just quite erratic. Do you think this is an opportunity for a bit of a sort of reset moment about how clubs deal with the transfer window in January? There's almost an expectation, isn't there, from fans, for sport, supporters, media, that clubs, do business in every window. Why would you not do business in every single window? And, there is a sort of valid excuse for clubs not to do business. So, next question is, traditionally, do you think there's been any value in the transfer window in January? And do you think this will be a bit of a reset moment for how clubs deal with it in the future?
Well, I do think it's more difficult to strategize, if that's a word, with the January window. It's a lot easier if you've got a full run at it, a full season to go at. The January window for me has always been results led. If you're doing really well, it could well be that you need to add to that to actually cement that position that you're in and maybe take you that little bit further. If things are not going too well, then again, you need to look at probably the other end of the pitch if you're conceding too many goals. So you'll be looking at a defender or a goalkeeper or somebody in that area of the pitch. So really, there's more, if I can say that, panic buying in January than there is in the summer window, because you've got more time to deliberate and think about it. You also have more time to do your homework. And getting the right players is all about doing your homework. And homework will encompass not only what you can see online, but also and the stats that go with that, but also in actually seeing the player live and getting a feel for him, It's more difficult, for the upside. I suppose you look at the signings that we made in the past, and when I was at Leicester, we got Mahrez in the January window, so that was somebody who could maybe help us to get over the line, which is what he did. But most of the sensible business, as I call it, is probably done in the summer.
Steve, as you're going through, obviously you've got your squad set up in the summer and you've got all your players signed. What are the sort of critical things? Is it injuries really that you're looking at? If like Liverpool have had a lot of their back four decimated by injury, the normal starting players. How would you respond if there was a couple of injuries in a certain area? Would that be a key driver for January?
It could be. You need to speak and have a very close link with your physio department, with the fitness part of the club, and get them to give you timelines in terms of the return of those players, and then work a strategy out based on that. Obviously, if somebody's going to be out for 12 months, then he goes completely out of the picture, and you've got to say, you need somebody who's capable. If you haven't got somebody who's already at the club who's capable of filling that space, then if you've got the resources to do it, then it makes common sense to try and up your game and fill that gap.
Yeah, I mean, the Liverpool situation is an interesting one, isn't it, Steve? Because obviously they've had some results in recent weeks that they'll be disappointed in. they've got some injuries, but they're not the type of club that is likely to loan anybody in. And then, you know, if they do acquire somebody, then when those players are back, you know, is that a bit of a waste of money? And you know that they've got too many players in a certain position. Do you sympathise with Liverpool at the moment?
Well, obviously losing Van Dijk's been a really big key miss for them, hasn't it? And obviously the results are not as I mean, listen, they're doing very, very well, aren't they? To be honest, without that. And also they've been trying other players in that position. So they've been playing other players out of position in centre-backs. I mean, Henderson played the other day, didn't he, as a centre-back? So from that point of view, you've got to look at your squad and see, can we get by with these players? Is playing, I mean, you know, they've got quite a lot of players and resources to go for, so it's about a little bit of a juggling act. But ultimately, if you're going to buy that top defender, let's say in Liverpool's case, then you've got to weigh up the odds of when Van Dijk comes back. Is that going to be surplus, or will he play with Van Dijk? But I think ultimately, if you've got the resources, and most Premier League clubs batting at that level have, then you would probably, if you've got that player who is well resourced, you've looked at it, you've done your homework on it, then you'll maybe make that signing.
Yeah, Steve, do you think that there needs to be more thought from clubs in buying or developing players that are a bit more of an all-rounder? You know, Wolves have done sort of similar things with the boy Dendoncker. Sometimes he's played in midfield. Sometimes he's played at the back. I mean, he's played in all positions. He played a bit further forward as well when Jota went. You mentioned Henderson, but he's not a sort of natural centre back. Is there some thoughts for how clubs recruit in the summer to mitigate some of these problems as well?
Well, good players are good players, you know. Dendoncker, obviously, when he was at Anderlecht, was it Anderlecht? He was at Anderlecht, wasn't it? Yeah. He obviously fits the bill. He's got the height. Conor Cody, remember, started his playing career as a midfield player at Liverpool. Deemed not to have the legs to get around the pitch, but has obviously settled into centre backs and has recently represented his country. So good players are good players, and you know, you can ask Guy, for instance. You know, if you want an emergency centre forward, you know, for the last 20 minutes or whatever, you'll push Guy up front and try and hit him, and you know, if you want to go.
Have you been drinking? You've been drinking this morning, Steve. Too many days in the house. I've got a question, Steve, in regards to psychological sides. I mean, how much work would you do in regards, obviously watching remotely, doing a lot of the conversations you have with the staff, but how much deep digging would you do on the players' psychological side before he came in the building? You know, from previous past issues to, you know, obviously future stuff now you're doing, because obviously it's a totally different format of going out, meeting the agent and the player, just meeting the player, getting the manager and the player meetings, all these different things to get a player in the building. How much can you actually think you could do in preparation for these windows and these future windows?
All I would say, guys, you do as much as you can. And obviously time is limited. And at this moment in time, travel is not possible. But in the past, I'd go out and I'd try and meet the player and get, you know what personal relationships are like.
Yeah, rapport's huge, eh?
Yeah, you get, if you got face-to-face confrontations or a communication with that person, you get a feel of what they're like. Even if the players that the English isn't the first language, you can still get a feel for them.
Yeah, body language is huge, right?
And that's part of the job. It's part of your job. It was part of my job to make sure that we did our due diligence. And then if things didn't work out, because 100% they're not always going to work out, at least you did as much as you could to try and make that the player that you wanted.
Steve, I was just going to say, you know, you said Mahrez was brought in a January, and a foreign player coming from a different league, a different type of football, into a different environment. Surely January is you know, it's like the toughest month to bring anyone in. The games are non-stop, you know, every couple of days. There's no real chance to get a breath and to get him out on the training pitch and really bed him in, really, is there?
No, and it's credit to the players who come in and do it and do well. And I remember when I signed Anthony Knockaert, I remember all the things that led up to it in terms of meeting him, met his girlfriend, met his dad at the time, sadly passed away. But you know, I got a really good feel for him, you know. But it's never until he turns up for the first training session and you put him in there with the lads, and you go and you watch the session, and you're always thinking, have I made a mistake? Is he going to do it? Is he? And when you get in there and you go, well, he fits in. He's not been embarrassed. He's doing really well. Yeah, listen, he's fine. He's fine.
And you know, in your club, if you've got, you know, some French speakers or Spanish speakers, those players are going to, you know, help to bed them into the group, aren't they? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and in terms of Knockaert was there when Mahrez came in, so the French connection was there, which had been from going back further still, Jan Kermagons.
Yeah.
Yeah. We brought him in, and obviously he left under a little bit of a cloud after he missed the penalty in the playoffs at Cardiff. I don't know if you remember that time when he chipped it into the goalkeeper's arms.
Oh. What was it? Panenka that went wrong? Was it Panenka that went wrong? I can't remember it.
Exactly. Oh, absolutely. And
was it? Oh no.
And he did it, but Knockaert did it against Watford in the playoffs again. So it was a little bit of me, French players and penalties at one point. It was like,
don't let them anywhere near them penalties.
There's a lot of people give me a lot of stick for that.
I want to bring Guy back in. You know, Tony mentioned the activity that has taken place so far in January, been mainly loans. You know, what's the activity been like for yourself? Has there been some interest in loans, from especially obviously your players?
Yeah, we've had it's probably been more me driven than normal. Agents calling me rather than me chasing agents or chasing the opportunities. It always depends on where we're at with the group. We've got an older group of 23s, so we're now actively looking for lads to go out and play. Again, depending on what you want to do with the group, where they are in the league, how they are in the cups, and various different things go on, because it's still a team. We have a very much of a team environment there. Steve will know Beeks and Ben Petty and people like that around the football club. It might have been Nick Eden when you was there, actually. But Ben Petty's the assistant manager. So they've got a very much a team-orientated style and a DNA, as people like to say now. So we have to be cautious of that. I can't go in and disrupt that too much. I wait to be told what's available and respect that, and then actively look for the group, what I have. I've done some decent work at the minute. There's some good stuff kicking off. I've probably watched more Championship football than the last couple of seasons, which has been great for me personally, because I've marked down a lot of talents that I think can kick on in my recruitment background as well. So there's been some real good information that's coming from my way. But I would say that there could be more. Don't get me wrong. It's not as quiet as people seem to think, because the actual moves aren't happening, but the cogs are in motion. People are on lists. People are trying to get stuff done. But as we always reiterate in these past couple of pandemic meetings, that the finances just aren't there. You know, I'm having conversations with managers about finances, and that they're going, look, we ain't got anything. We'd love to take him, but we ain't got anything. And I'm going, well, yeah, you always say that. That's just your starting point. But no, they literally haven't got anything. And you see them not doing moves, you see them not doing things, and you might have missed an opportunity to get the lad playing. So it's, you know, about compromising as well now, which is probably more apparent with the Premier League teams. And we're trying to do as best to help the lower end sides to get lads playing football as well.
That's really interesting. Steve, what do you think is the future of the January transfer window? I mean, there are some people out there that would take it out completely. You know, do you think it'll still be here in sort of 5, 10 years time, or?
I think that the clubs that are in the Premier League will certainly want that. It's a bit of a safety net for some of them. It's, you know, if you're a manager and you take over in December for a club that is really struggling, you want to kind of make your mark not only with your coaching ability, but you also want to make your mark with maybe some key signings that you know could help you. And so from that point of view, I don't think it's going to be taken away. I think you're always going to have that safety net of that facility for you. And if any one of us was manager of a team that we'd taken over, that we'll see certain players that we'll embrace and get the best out of, but we'll also see other players that we really don't want at the club for whatever reason.
Yeah,
and
Brian,
and once we've moved those players on, we need to fill that gap. And if you're given the resources, you know, we're always driven by how much the owner wants to spend. At the end of the day, it's budget driven, and if they come to us and say, look, we've got this amount to spend, could you spend it wisely, and can you get us out of this hole that we're in at the moment, then sure, they're gonna go for it. So I can't see the January window disappearing anytime soon.
No, and Ryan, I was just going to add that you know, from an agent's perspective, if your player's at a club and he's not been playing and he's maybe coming to the end of his contract in the summer, you know, you want to try and get him out. You know, you hope that the club are going to allow him to come out, and if you can get a transfer done where the player's going to go somewhere and play, you know, whether it's on loan or whether it's, you know, a new contract, another year and a half or whatever on top of it, then you'll be wanting to do that, because, you know, you can't just sit there and just wait for your chance, you know. And if you're locked into the club for the whole season and you haven't played, and then you become free in the summer, it might be difficult for you for your next move.
Absolutely. I mean, Tony, I want to come back to you in terms of some of the dialogue that you've been having with clubs inside and outside of the Premier League. I mean, does it fit the following the trend of the rest of the conversation, where people are either nervous or can't afford it, or you know, are there some clubs, do you think, that they might end up doing something towards the end of the window?
Well, I think the summer really indicated what was going to go on. The Premier League really carried on sort of regardless. I know Chelsea did a lot of money and a lot of business, but if you looked at the Championship in the summer, they really pulled back from doing any big transfer deals. There was a lot of money going out. A lot of clubs sold players. You know, there was, you know, 5 or 6 of the Championship clubs sold players for big money in the summer and didn't reinvest that money. So it started in the summer. The January is literally, I don't think anyone wants to pay a transfer fee in the Championship. And certainly when you look down to League One and League Two, the salary cap there has had a massive effect. So even if, let's use Sunderland as an example, maybe Sunderland gets some new owners in, they're going to be hamstrung a little bit by the salary cap of what they can do in terms of bringing players in. You know, what you're going to be able to offer a player who's coming in under a salary cap. Do you know, it's where you might want to try and spend your way out of the division. And there's a few clubs like, you know, Stoke are very well financed with the Bet365 company behind them. They'd love to spend more money probably, but the way things are working with financial fair play and how, you know, the market's just contracted so much, it's going to be very, very difficult to do transfer deals where a club's asking for a fee. There may be 1 or 2 at the top end, but I very much at the top end of the Championship, but I very much doubt it. You know, I think loans is the flavour of this January window. If you can get a loan deal done, then great. You know, hopefully things look better in the summer.
Yeah, and you know, I think that, as we spoke about before on these sessions as well, I think there's some political pressure for EFL clubs not to spend too much money as well. You know, they've just negotiated you know, a quite a sort of sizable rescue package in inverted commas via the Premier League, and yeah, I don't think that was for the purchasing of players particularly. Steve, just the last few questions, a bit more general. How do you see the efficiency of the transfer market at the moment? Do you think clubs are doing better at buying players? We know the values are absolutely enormous, and I know it's a tough question, but do you see a sort of general trend of clubs getting it right more often, or does it remain a really inefficient market?
I think certain clubs are very good at the recruitment in terms of the robustness of the system. So Liverpool, for instance, have got a lot of good people, Dave Fallows, etc., Michael. And I think their system seems to work very well in terms of knowing the market, knowing who they want, and knowing who they can bring in. And so if Klopp goes to them and says, look, this is what I need, then there's maybe 4 or 5 options for him in terms of what do you think, and between them they make a decision. I think where the systems are not as robust, I think mistakes are still made. Yeah. There are certain clubs that are agent driven, and irrespective of what the recruitment department do, they are kind of marginalised, and the agents and the manager may be in collusion, may do the transfers, and the head of recruitment or the sporting director even might not know what's going on. And so if you've got an organised, very centralised system that you can use, fine. But if it's hit and miss, then you're going to get hit and miss recruitment in terms of the players that you bring in. So it depends on the system, and it depends on the club, and that'll never change. It's going to be, it's how you do your business that's important. And I know what I believe in, but other people don't, and you've got to respect that as well. You look at the Wolves model, for instance, and whatever we think about super agents, they've done a good job. Wolves are a good example of running your club that way. So it's how you do your business.
It's cost them a lot of money, but they've certainly generated some results. One final question, Steve. How do you compare the recruitment models that you've sort of traditionally been involved with in England to what you're now experiencing in the States? Are there any sort of tangible differences in terms of process?
Well, if you read the rules about the makeup of your first team roster, as they call it, it's incredible the amount of rules there are. There's TAM money, there's GAM money, there's designated players, there's young designated players, and actually you need a degree to work out what the composition of your squad is before you actually take that first step. But you need to look at the American players, the players who will form a big part of your squad. I think the maximum foreign players you can bring in is 8, and so you need good designated players, but you also need a core of good American players, or certainly players with green cards. And I think that's the way forward. Make sure that you've got the right balance, so that you've got good designated players. Not you don't have to pay a fortune in terms of get a superstar, but get somebody who can do the job, and then make sure that you've got some soldier bees who are working hard to make the stars.
Fantastic. Well, we'll certainly be looking forward to seeing Charlotte play. Have you got an idea when your first friendly game, the first exhibition game might be?
Well, I think we'll probably start playing in January, February, pre-season games, and that'll take place 2022, January 2022. I'm going to try and get it in my head as well. And you know, we may go into Europe and play some games over there first before we actually start the league program. So fantastic. It's exciting times.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for that, Steve. Please stay on. If anybody's got any questions, and I have seen a few questions pop up on the chat, could you please post them in the Q&A box? And then we've got plenty of time at the end. I'll come back to Steve and ask him some of the questions, which is great. But if now we could introduce Ramm. Ramm, if you could turn your camera on. Hi, Ramm.
Hi, Ryan. Good morning to you.
How are you? You okay?
Yeah, good. Thank you. Thank you very much for the invite.
No problem. Now, you're here to talk about your sort of newest venture, AI Abacus, Ramm. But you've got a really interesting history in the game. So, I mean, would you mind just spending 30 seconds just letting everybody and all the listeners know about what, you know, your past and your experience?
Sure. Guys, good morning again. We said hello briefly earlier, and to the participants who are on board. I got myself involved in football about 20 years ago, having worked for a large FMCG company, Mars, the chocolate guys, and started working. The original foray was at Derby County, and Derby County had just got promoted, and they were looking for ways of staying in the Premier League. And I met with Steve McLaren and Jim Smith, and noted that they didn't have any kind of data systems to understand the players. So, you know, classic thing we do in a business is have job descriptions, and there was no job descriptions. So when I asked Jim the famous question all those years ago, said, Jim, how do you know this player is good or not? And he looked at me straight in the eye and said, because I bloody know. And I thought it was a brilliant answer. And so, but Steve then pepped up and sort of said, Ramm, what you on about? And so I explained what is it. And that set about me creating a business called Prozone. And what we did effectively was track the movement of all 22 players, the referees and the linesmen. And if a dog ran on it, it got tracked. And we converted that information set into effectively initially trying to understand and digitize and understand the game, and which was quite revolutionary at that time. We got a lot of kudos out of it. And one of the things is I bought a lottery ticket with Derby County because Steve McLaren got headhunted to go to Manchester United. And the first year we worked with United, they just happened to win the treble. And, you know, that was just sheer luck. And as in all businesses, you know, you need a bit of luck, and that was our luck. And that kind of prompted us. So I still remember 25th of May, 1999, we had 2 clients, both of them not paying. And because everybody's, you know, thought us as this crazy startup. And by August 1999, we had about 7 or 8 Premier League teams. Wow. So it made a big difference.
Wow.
And that's what set me into this world of football, if you like. Before that, I didn't know much about it. Knew a lot about selling Mars bars.
Good stuff. But now it's all about AI Abacus. I'm gonna share my screen again, and we're gonna go through the slides here. So talk to us, Ramm. Tell us about AI Abacus.
Okay. I then sold Prozone on to a venture capital company, and about 2 years ago, I met a professor at Southampton University called Professor Gopal Ramchun, and some of his colleagues who had been working on quite a unique concept. What they were trying to do was to understand player dynamics in one team, player chemistry, player style in one team, and seeing if that can be transported into another team. And they had done some research for about 5 or 6 years, published some research papers, which were all peer-reviewed and accepted by the AAAI. And they showed me these papers and said, Ramm, you seem to know a bit about football. What do you think? And I was blown away. So I said to the guys, what do you guys want to do with this? And they said, well, we'd love you to help us start a business. And that really led to the creation of AI Abacus. So we started about 2 years ago, looked at what can be done. We looked at the marketplace, and there was 2 ways we could have gone. One is as a consultancy business, go work with a club or an organization to provide, or what we preferred to do was to have a different business altogether. And what we had identified is what I call there as a missing link. And, you know, Guy and Steve, you'll understand this probably. You guys intuitively know who you want to recruit. What you ideally want is something that substantiates or gives you credible alternative to that scenario. And one of the things that you guys have been using traditionally is looking at historic data and trying to interpret if that data is still valid if it comes to your team. And Guy and Steve, for you, somebody like Maris is a great example. You know, how you go and unearth somebody like that, you know, it's almost incredible to believe that you can do that intuitively, because ultimately you do use some data, but the ability to go and look at a particular player and understand his style and dynamics to be able to interpret that he's likely to fit into your team. So what we have decided to do was, if you go to the next slide, Ryan.
No problem.
Is to really try and provide some predictive analysis, because that's how businesses work. Businesses work by looking at data, understanding data. You know, I remember I worked for Mars for the best part of 20 years. I met John Mars when I went to set up the business in Japan. And he said, Ram, we take 3 ingredients, cocoa, milk, and sugar, and turn it into a $50 billion business. So don't screw it up. Okay. It was a very simple brief. Okay. So one of the things that you learn from something like that is that what you need to be able to do is to provide professionals like Steve and Guy the ability to understand that data in a framework that makes sense, so they can form credible alternatives to their intuition. And they can look at the data and make it make sense. So we identified 3 KPIs: performance, value, and suitability. And then we felt that we needed to create a portal where you can go simply search. And we have a data lake of about 130,000 players. Search for players that you want to search by criteria that you imply into the search engine. Then you want to benchmark those particular players. And then you want to simulate the suitability of that players and understand the return on investment on that players. And that is the predictive elements that we bring to the party. So we think we're different. And, you know, it's almost like, for me, it's almost like walking the same paths I did with Prozone, trying to persuade people that, you know, we got this new thing. I remember when I first did that Aston Villa versus Derby game and presented to Jim Smith. Jim said, Ram, this is not like any football game I've seen before, so I don't understand it. So what I then did was go found some football specialists to interpret that data. And that is what we have done. So what I did here to start this business is we have an analyst team, we have a software development team, and we have a football team who help people like Guy and Steve make sense of what these analysts have done. So that is effectively, in a nutshell, AI Abacus. Hope that wasn't too fast, guys.
No, no, that's absolutely fine. So Ram, there's obviously your details, and Tony, we're going to be doing another session with Ram and the guys, aren't we? A bit of a longer session where we're going to get into more detail about the product next Thursday.
Yeah, absolutely, Ryan. I mean, Ram's covered the main points, but there's a lot more to it than that. So what we've decided to do is we're putting on a 30-minute, it might go a little bit longer, webinar next Thursday, 10:30. It's a free webinar. We'd like as many people to come on who are interested in this particular area. Obviously, he's got a fantastic background as Ramm. I love the Mars story, Ramm. That's fantastic. And, you know, you're welcome to join us. I'll send out some invites to everyone who's been on the call today, on the webinar today. So, you know, put that in your diaries for this time, 10:30 next Thursday morning.
Just one last comment, Ryan, if I may.
Of course, absolutely.
Guys, the way we've set up the business also is we work from the #2 club in the world all the way down to Hartlepool. So we have about 30 or 40 clubs on trial at this particular moment using the problem for using the system. And Steve, Guy, we haven't quite got to Leicester yet. And when we do that, we'll have the #1 club as well.
Oh,
Fantastic.
Thanks a lot, Ryan. Thanks.
Thank you, Ram.
Nice one, Ram. Brilliant, that, Ram. Thanks a lot. Stick around, Ram.
Yeah, absolutely. Stick around, Ram, for any questions. Like, if you've got any questions today that you'd like to ask Ram, sort of as per the questions to Steve, please get them in the Q&A, and I will ask Ram a little bit later on. But Tony, we're doing all right for time. I thought for first one of the year we might be a bit sluggish, but we're going along nicely. And it's time to introduce David Seligman, who's a solicitor at Brandsmiths. So, David, welcome again to the webinar today. We're going to talk about what is this world that we've moved into, sort of post this Brexit agreement. What does it mean for players coming into the country? And I know we're going to try and get through 4 points, which is a sort of summary of what the new regs are. Secondly, what's the implications of those new requirements? 3, what are some of the significant changes for minors? And then and 4th, which sometimes I think we forget about and we don't have enough consideration on, what's the impact for UK players overseas as well. So I'll hand it over to you. Summary of the new regs. I know it's complicated, but let's hear what they mean for British football.
Thanks, Ryan. So obviously, as of this year, the UK is no longer a member of the European Union, which has had a huge impact on the transfer window that we're presently in, and UK clubs being able to sign EU-based players, which predominantly would be the market where players would come to the UK from. So for a player to get a Tier 2 visa, which is a skilled person, or a Tier 5 visa, which is a temporary worker, they'll need something called a governing body endorsement from the Football Association, which is then sent off to the Home Office along with other requirements to obtain a visa. Now, the interesting thing is, and I'll come to this later when we talk about implications of Brexit and the GBE, is that, let's say, for instance, we'll mainly work on a Tier 2 visa, which is a skilled person. They only last for 3 years. So upon the expiry of 3 years, you'll have to apply for a new GBE. Or, for instance, if you were a foreign player here under a Tier 2 visa and you were going to transfer to another club in the UK, you would again have to apply for a new GBE. So the obvious question is, how do you get one? There are sort of 2 limbs. The first limb is the auto pass limb, which is based upon the number of international appearances a player makes, calculated in relation to the ranking of the player's international nation that it plays. So, for instance, if you play only 30% of games for Belgium, you'll automatically get a auto pass to GBA, essentially. Similarly, if you played 100% of games for Australia, you would get the GBA. If you don't get an auto pass, then you have to obtain 15 points on the points-based system, and points are calculated by reference to minutes played, whether they be in domestic or continental competition, success of the previous club, so how well have they done in domestic cups, leagues and continental competition, and also the quality of the league you were playing in. So, for instance, if you were playing in one of the top leagues around Europe, say, even if you're only within one match day squad, you would automatically get 12 points. So you're already pretty much there. So if you then played in, I don't know, 30% of games at that level, you're well beyond the amount of points required. So the implications of that we'll come to later are that, in my opinion at least, there's going to be far more players eligible to come and play here who were internationals, for instance. if you don't get 15 points, but you get more than 10 or 10 or more, you can apply to the exemptions panel, which is a panel of independent, legally qualified people who will review your application and basically decide if there are reasonable grounds or exceptional circumstances that prevented the player from getting 15 points, then they will be given a GBE. Now, the exemption panel is for this window only, which will cause issues because nobody has been before an exemption panel before this month anyway, and it is only around for this month. After this month, and in general with the whole GBE process, there will be a review ahead of the next window. I don't think there's going to be a ton of changes in relation to the criteria. However, I do think there will be some sort of exemptions panel in relation to people who don't get 15 points. So that's sort of the main rules regarding male players, essentially.
Yeah.
Similar rules are in place for sporting directors, directors of football, managers and assistant managers, where, again, leagues that they've come from are banded, and they have to, again, meet certain criteria. Managers and director of football need UEFA Pro licenses, for instance. They need to have certain responsibilities. Importantly, for managers, you need to show you don't have one, essentially. So you can't be looking to get a GB before you sack your previous manager, which might be a problem for some owners.
Yep.
And assistant coaches as well. Similarly, they need an A license or the equivalent from a major one of the confederations. So they're the basic rules, I guess.
Yeah. So I think some really interesting implications straight off the back, in terms of, I guess this presumption was that it was going to mean we were going to see perhaps a sort of smaller reservoir of players available to come into the country. But actually, it's the contrary, isn't it? As you said, it could actually work that there's a bigger pool of players at least able to get these GBEs.
I think the big implication is there'll be less EU players being able to come here, obviously. On the flip side, there'll be far more South American players who will be able to come here. So historically, and Steve will know this, Guy will know this, you and Tony will know this, that if you were going to speak with an agent, it's like, look, don't even bother, unless he's a top player, unless he's got an EU passport, don't really bother putting him towards me. Well, that all changes now, because you could have a player playing in sort of the Mexican top division who regularly plays at that level, who isn't an international for that country or is an international from a minor nation, but is a superb player. I mean, if they play, let's say, for instance, they play for one of the top clubs in Mexico, he plays week in, week out, he would get a GBA because they are band 3, so he would get 15 points. So that's a complete different market where scouts probably wouldn't bother looking, because absent of an EU passport, they would be unable to come here. In addition to that, a particular market which is extremely attractive, particularly to lower-end Premier League clubs, Championship clubs, with a second tier in, say, France, Spain, Germany. Well, players playing at that level who always represented particularly good value, and obviously Steve knows a lot about that, they will struggle to get GBEs because they are listed as band 4. So a band 4 player, for instance, if he plays 100% of games, would get 6 points, and the league itself would only carry weight of 6 points, so you'd get 12 points. So if you played week in, week out in the second tier in France, and obviously they don't do that well in domestic cup competitions, they don't play in continental competitions, you're unlikely to get a GBA. So it's really probably a big shift on where some of the clubs that do a lot, well, the top clubs in particular do the scouting abroad, might be looking to invest more resource into leagues in Argentina, Mexico, Brazil, albeit it'd be a bit more expensive from travel when the world opens up again, then looking at the lower leagues in Europe, which normally is a particular
And
place
then, David, what about the African players? You mentioned South America might benefit. What about national team players or African-based players or players of, you know, from that continent?
Yeah, obviously we spoke about this in the prep meeting. I mean, the African market is a market where it's difficult to obtain a visa, mainly because those leagues aren't ranked high enough. However, the auto-pass system sort of expands the amount of international international teams that you could play for that you could get an auto-pass. So, for instance, Senegal is ranked in the top 20 in the world.
Yep.
You could be a Senegalese international playing in Eastern Europe, for instance, and you wouldn't get a GBE, or you play in Russia, or I don't know. But if you've played 40% of international games, let's say there's a year of an African Nations tournament when you'll have a lot of games, and if you're in that squad, you'd get a GBE. And I think it opens up the market for particularly youth players on the GBE, because there are a lot of youth tournaments that qualify from a points-based system that are open to African players. And
David, one of my favourite tournaments has been included in that in the GBE as a Band 1 tournament, and that's the Maurice Revelot tournament, who a lot of people know as the Toulon tournament, and obviously that's a fantastic tournament, and it's great to see that in Band 1. You know, that you can take an under-20 team, maybe an African under-20 team, or from wherever.
Agree, Tony. But in addition to that, it expands it further. If you want to know about the African market, you've got the under-17 African Nations goes into that. Yeah. So you get quite a lot of points. I think you get 7 points for participating in that. And that goes a long way. Obviously, you get nearly half your points there. So for a youth player, the obvious caveat is the present exemptions panel, and I imagine this will carry forward. And this is something where it's a very subjective, but particularly with youth players, if you can show they've got significant potential, then you would get a GBE. So let's say a player went to the African Nations under 20s at like 15 or 16 and like ran riot, scored 10 goals. Yeah, it'd probably be quite easy to get that person a GB when, well, as long as they're 18, sorry, because
18, because that's another issue, David, isn't it? The situation. Just talk us through the situation with the minors as well. You know.
So there's a difference between a minor and a youth player. So a youth player under the GB is 21 and under, whereas a minor is under 18. So, and this is particularly relevant for UK clubs. So minors can't move cross-border unless they're can't do international transfers. The exemptions to that were 16 to 18-year-olds within the European Union, or if, for instance, a parent is moving for non-football related issues. But long of the days have gone where Barcelona have obviously got in trouble if you're signing a 15, 16-year-old because the father ends up being like assistant groundsman on one of the training ground pitches. You're not allowed to do that anymore. So by the UK leaving the European Union, they are no longer in a position where they can sign 16 to 18-year-olds within the EU, which is particularly problematic because you want to snap up the best talent around Europe, but might be the reason why you get clubs like Man City acquiring, and Leicester, for instance, obviously have got in Belgium, acquiring clubs around Europe so that they are able to continue to sign the best minors.
David, is there any exceptions from cross-border within the UK, or do the restrictions stay the same there?
So, well, obviously within the UK, it's within the UK. So if you're a Scottish player, you can play here. But if, for instance, you're, as I was saying, let's say you're playing for Celtic under a GBE, and you were to then sign for a Premier League club.
I mean for minors.
Oh, you mean for minors? There are special rules allowing minors to pass between the UK.
Okay, right, great.
That is an exemption.
But you were saying about the Celtic player, because obviously all Celtic players are in recent history, they all go down to Southampton, don't they, seemingly, or a lot of them do, and do well. But so they would have to reapply, would they, on that transfer?
Well, the thing is, it's a little bit different. In Scotland, it's easier to get a Tier 2 visa than it is to get one in England.
Right.
Let's say, for instance, you had a visa in Scotland, you would still need a GBE to come to play to England. And we were talking before that, obviously, if a player gets a GBE under a Tier 2 visa for 3 years, obviously that's going to have an impact on the contracts that are being offered to those players. So, for instance, rather than a blanket 5-year deal for a player that you're spending a lot of money on, which is normal, you're probably not going to look to offer a 5-year deal to players anymore. You probably look to offer a 3-year deal with options to extend on the basis that, you know, the player can get another GBE or
David, is it fair to say that this is going to be a test case this January? Do you think? See how it goes.
They've got to sign some players first.
Hopefully that will happen towards the back end of the window.
I've not seen any deals I've not seen any business done so far, and we're a week in where a foreign player has been.
David, literally, just before this webinar, I noticed on Twitter, I've just shared it in the chat. Nottingham Forest signed a Guatemalan 18-year-old who played in Brazil or something. Nottingham Forest Academy. So I'm absolutely flabbergasted how that's gone in. But obviously, he must tick all the boxes and get all the points.
Actually, I mean, the big thing as well, obviously, if you want to go back, is what is the impact on UK-based players moving outside of this jurisdiction? I get asked that an awful lot, and I have been asked that loads in the last week, and the answer is pretty simple. It all depends on what the signing country's own immigration laws are. Yeah. But to be fair, around the continent, generally speaking, if you are a youth international, you're able to get a visa, for instance. Yeah. So I don't think there's going to be there won't be much. There's a big trend of sort of 18 to 20-year-old England youth internationals moving into Europe. I don't think that will change. I think that will continue.
David, I wanted to ask, do you have much knowledge in terms of how these regulations have been put together? Because whilst they are trying to put a framework in place, of course, they're built. Subjectivity is built within it. You know, how have they gone about ranking the leagues? Have they gone from sort of confederation points and things like that? I mean, how have they sort of stripped subjectivity out of what is the framework now?
So I don't know how they've done. I wasn't party to sort of discussions, but having read it, it just seems they've been sensible. Essentially, they've had a look at which are the best leagues and attributed certain bans to certain divisions. I mean, there are, for instance, certain leagues that I'm surprised to see that aren't banded. For instance, you've got the Ukrainian Premier League is banned for, which is fine because you've got clubs that participate quite far into the Champions League and Europa League from that division. But then you look at Israel, for instance, which has clubs that, you know, play in the Europa League, move a lot of players to the UK, particularly into Scotland and into England. They're not even in any band. So they'd be classed as a band 6. So there are some for me that are, most of it's fair enough, but there are some that I wouldn't even know. I don't know too much about the Colombian Premier League. I don't know if it's a better league than the Serbian Super League. But according to those who made the rules,
very similar, David. And just a sort of final question from me. You know, should there be sort of any agents or clubs on the call here, and they end up getting into some sort of arbitration, and it does need to go to the panel? What's the makeup of the panel going to be?
So the makeup of the panel is it's a suitably legally qualified person. So basically, maybe an immigration lawyer or maybe a barrister with experience in immigration and sports, and they basically just tot up the points. There is some guidance that is provided to the panel on how to make their decision. It's far stricter in relation to overage players, especially non-minors. But with minors, I think to have sort of a caveat in there where the player shows significant potential. I mean, I think that's sort of a free-for-all. Once you get 10 points, I think you'll be able to. If you're a Premier League club and you're looking to invest, I don't think you can. I think it'd be difficult to argue that the player isn't showing significant potential.
Yeah.
And I've seen some comments from in the chat, people looking retrospectively. Mahrez potentially wouldn't have qualified, and what have you. How do you see it having a real impact in the Premier League? I know we spoke about before, the Premier League still want to buy the big stars, and the big stars will qualify. But there are those players, aren't they, that come from sort of a lower level, your Mahrez, your Kantés and what have you.
I think the impact is very big. I mean, there's one player who I'm involved with through one of the agent clients I have, who would be absolutely fantastic signing to come here, but there's no way he could get a GB. So you've got clubs missing out on talent that he would go to another club in Europe. So that'll compete. That'll obviously have an impact. I think one of the big things that people thought that the GB would do, which it may well do, is expand opportunities for English players to go up the pyramid. I think that will happen. I also think English players will become even more expensive than they already are. You pay a premium, typically for, say, a player out the Championship as opposed to a player out the second tier in France. It'll be 10 times more expensive. I think that'll go up because it's quicker and easier to sign an English player than it is to go through the rigmarole of this process. And I think that will have an impact on player wages as well. I think sometimes that they'll probably go up at the higher level. I think looking outside the top division and maybe half of the Championship, it's going to be near impossible for League One and League Two players to sign players from abroad. Salary cap and the players just aren't going to meet the criteria, are they?
No. Guy, I'm interested to ask you about whether there's been any sort of internal chat about bringing players into the sort of higher academy group at Leicester, or whether you're going to be diverting players that you're interested over to the club in Belgium as a result of these restrictions.
I think what David was saying is true. I'm going to speak quite harsh like normal, but there's a laziness about managers of looking quite quickly at what they can recruit ASAP rather than forward thinking club wise. Our recruitment has been noted to look farther afield to opportunities and markets of value, markets of opportunities where we might look into, and there's been things bandied about, like there always is in the press, about where we're looking. So I think as a football club, we'll always scan the markets, and that'll be every market available to us to recruit properly and recruit efficiently, and we've shown great value like we've always done because we're Leicester City. And I think with our track record with Steve involved and obviously the new guys, and I think we've always looked for great value and great places to go and trade. I don't think it's been kind of thrown upon us, this new system, pretty quickly. So a lot of people are scurrying around trying to make opportunities available to them. So that's probably why we haven't seen a lot of the trades that have happened. But I think over the time we get to understand it more. I think a lot of clubs in general will look further afield for better opportunities out there. It raises the bar of, like you said, David, there, of the English player, but is the English player necessarily good enough to warrant a Premier League start? And that's always my question mark with the standard that you look at, say, the Wolves players who you've mentioned before, the quality of the Portuguese lads and the value that they've shown by bringing in some of their value players already, and the 11 internationals they now have in the Portuguese squad, in the Wolves squad. You're looking at unbelievable amounts of value from the amounts of money they've spent still to make them now Premier League players. So there's going to be some great opportunities out there. If you're creative, if you're dynamic as a recruitment department, as a football club, I think you'll find great opportunities. If you just go off what a manager or an agent tells you, I think you'll get found out.
Brilliant, excellent. Well, David, thank you for that very sort of detailed summary there. We've got lots of questions for all the panelists, so I want to get through as many of them as possible. First question is for you, Steve, from Harry. Harry asks, do you think the MLS has shaken the reputation of being a retirement league for big players going out on one last payday off? And if not, has this stigma had any effect on your recruitment in terms of players doubting the level and the other players that they'll be playing with?
Well, the remit from the owner and from the president is certainly that it's not a retirement league. We would only sign players who are going to do the job. We hope to hit the ground running and make sure that our key signings are actually worth whatever we decide to outlay on those players. So it certainly has turned itself around. It is now not a place where players can come for a holiday at the end of their careers. Yeah. And I think you need to look at the character of the player in terms of what their motivation is to come to play in the MLS. It is quite a considerable fact that, you know, we do look, and clubs in the MLS do look at experienced players who've done it before. But I think the key skill there is to work out whether there's still a passion to achieve. And if you can work that one out, and that's the key to success. Is the passion still there?
Yeah, and Steve, how valuable has it been, you guys being able to analyse the other new sides that have joined the MLS? You know, Beckham's lot, and what have you? You know, they've not had a great start. Has that been interesting? Has that been valuable to see how they've gone about their recruitment?
Absolutely. We look at all the models of all the teams in the MLS and their recruitment policies. But we do focus on the new franchise that are coming on stream to see how they've done it. And hopefully, because we've been put back a year, we might be able to capitalise that on that and learn from it. So that's got to be a good thing from our recruitment point of view.
Brilliant. David, quite a few questions for yourself, so we'll try and do it in a sort of quick fire way if we can. First question from Sebastian. I mentioned the points criteria at 15 and 10. Is that the same for every competition, for example, League One, Championship and Premier League?
Yeah, it's to get it's an FA thing. It's to get that amount of points to get a governing body endorsement from the FA.
Okay. Another question from Lucian, a question for David. Follow on from Brexit and the regs. Do you think visas for Australian footballers could be relaxed, as there is currently some talk about the UK Home Office and the Australian Department for Foreign Affairs and Trade working a more relaxed general work visa for both citizens of the country? Do you think this might apply to Australian footballers if that was followed through? So, you know, Boris is very confident, isn't he, about getting all these trade deals, about getting out there, about the big reset, about, you know, pushing Britain forward. Could we see work visas being a bit of a
essentially they are work visas? The GBE is to get a work visa. If you can get a work visa not by having a GBE, then yeah, I don't see why not.
Okay, excellent.
Although you do need a GBE to play, so that could be something that is brought in with the exceptions going forward when the rules are reviewed ahead of the next window.
Perfect. I think one for everything is a question for everyone. Sorry, is a question from Will. And Will says, given that players born in the Republic of Ireland are not subject to the GBE as a result of the common travel area between the UK and the Republic of Ireland, does the panel see the Irish market become more important, particularly for Championship, League One and League Two clubs? And of course, Tony, a player that we like the look of at Bohemians, has just left to join Huddersfield. One, what do you think of the Irish market? Two, do you think clubs are already looking there?
Yeah, no, I really like the league in the Southern Ireland. You know, I had back in it was a couple of years ago at Sligo when Ian Barraclough was manager, and he brought one of my players in from Newcastle United, and had the player loved it. It's a really good standard. They ended up being successful in that league, and there's lots of good clubs down there. And obviously, Now they've started to crack the European competition, like the Dundalks of this world. The money is getting better in there. There's always been good players coming from Ireland. It's just, I think the big difference is at what age are they going to come now? Are they going to come at 18? Are they going to get some, you talked about Danny Grant, who's moved from Bowes to Huddersfield. He was like the best young player in the league, voted for. Is he going to go to Huddersfield and make an impact in the first team? That remains to be seen. But it's what age might these players come? But I think it's a really attractive marketplace. Interestingly as well, I'm sure Cork went down from the Premier League and they've been bought out by the owners of Preston. And I think Preston have took a couple of players before from Cork. And that sort of link up seems to me to make a lot of sense. Just as I see the link up that Leicester City and Leuven have got in Belgium, those sort of relationships are going to be real game changers, I think. You're muted, Ryan.
Guy, did you have any thoughts on the Irish League? Is it a league that gets looked at from Leicester's perspective, whether it's for academy players or even young professional players?
Going into my playing background, we grew up with Wolves' influx of the Irish in regards to Robbie Keane, Glenn Crowe, Andrews, people like that, Keith Andrews. To have to grow up with that and see the influx that we brought over as well from Ireland, which we brought quite a lot over. So I've always been amazed by the clubs not doing it more in recent years. Because probably the standard had dropped slightly, but I was always a big fan of it myself when I was recruiting, because I seen good players going out there. We loaned a player out there when I was Notts County's head of recruitment to Sligo as well, so I went over. So for the last 6 or 7 years I've kept an eye on it and seeing the guys moving in and out. I think it's a great market. I think it's probably Conference League 2 standard, with some of the young players playing men's football, a high intensity, high impact game. So it's great to understand where the lads are playing at a young age, and they're playing a good standard of competitive football and not the relaxed style that the 23s can sometimes show. So it's a great place to go and get talent out of, and I always promote that league. I think it's brilliant, and that more should again be dynamic and look into it, in my opinion.
Steve, is it a market? Is it a territory that you've spent much time looking at in the past?
Well, we haven't done so far, but it's certainly a market that is emerging. As Guy says, to recruit, you need to look everywhere. With Charlotte, for instance, there'll be a lot of recruitment done looking at South American players, because the fan base of Charlotte, there's a lot of Hispanic, the Hispanic communities in that area, and you look at that for your fan base, the soccer fans, and so they can identify with some of the South American players. So I think that's a market that we will utilise, but you don't throw away the Irish market. There's always good players there, and as you say, Preston have taken the initiative there, and I applaud them for that. Peter Risdale.
Yeah, Steve, do you think you're going to go and take some players from the South American market, and we know what good quality players you can find in that market? It's a massive market. You're going to bring them into Charlotte, hopefully. Would you then be looking to open your pipeline up and all your big network in England, and maybe the next Almiron sort of thing will come, South America, Charlotte, into the UK? Yeah,
for sure. I think if you look at the left back who went from the MLS to Bayern Munich, Alfonso. He's a key member of the Bayern Munich squad now, playing at the very highest level. And he's learned his football in America in the MLS and through the system that way. So I think that it will expand, and I think there will be a lot of clubs in the UK in the future, certainly even at Premier League level, looking at the talent and how it's coming through, because the MLS is obviously going to grow and become a bigger league. I know that the MLS want to upstage the Premier League ultimately and become one of the the top 5 leagues in the world. I mean, that is an ambition of theirs. And so that fits very much into that profile. So, yeah. But going back to your question about Ireland, why not?
Yeah.
Why not?
Ramm, I want to ask. I want to ask you, in terms of, you guys are obviously looking at sort of suitability of players coming from one club and fitting into another. From the work that you guys have done, is there anything really preventing a sort of one territory to another territory that doesn't work at all, or is it all down to the individual?
I think the difficulty is to, first of all, to try and understand the different playing styles in the different leagues. So one of the things that we've tried to do within AI Abacus is to, first of all, understand that and add that into the analytical process. And, Guy and Steve will know this very well. And so at this particular moment, we are working with 2 federations, one in Germany and one in Mexico. And Mexico in particular, we are, looking at the league and the players and working with. They have created a innovation center called CIT, and we're working with those guys to try and implement a system that enables them to excel in 2026, which is the World Cup that's going to be the United 2026 World Cup. So they've got a vision in mind, and we're trying to play a part in allowing their players then to go find suitable clubs to excel before they come back home and form part of the national team. Something similar to what Qatar did 5 years ago with Aspire. So, but I think the interesting thing for the January transfer window is, I think the Steve and guys are going to create a whole new template in the way players are going to have to be assessed, because we haven't got the freedom to go and look at players as much as we did before. So what we need is an effective search, select, profile, and benchmark system that enables Guy and Steve to be able to do that effectively globally. And I think we're going to create a whole new template, I think, in the January transfer. Don't know what that's going to look like, Guy, but you will have a better feel for how that's going to transpire by the end of January. Love to have a chat.
Thanks, Ramm. Just a couple of questions to finish off then. David, another question for you. Question asked, do you think that the GBE will have an impact on the transfer market, not only on a European level, but also on a global level, as English clubs now have the opportunity, for example, to sign young players directly from South America? If these are under 19, under 20, under 21 players are eligible for GBEs thanks to their international appearances. So, the knock-on effect, do you see it being a global one? The
obvious thing is that when big money is spent by the Premier League, or not even necessarily big money, but let's say sort of 5 million quid is spent on, say, a player playing in a minor league in Europe, the knock-on effect is for them to then go and be able to invest that elsewhere.
Yeah.
So obviously they will lose out on that revenue, and that revenue may well be shifted to other parts of the world. For instance, we were discussing South America as a particular continent that I think is going to really be exploited, and it was difficult for, the Brazilian clubs, for instance, have commanded quite substantial transfer fees for certain players, but now they might be able to command even larger fees, and once they get those fees, reinvest those. And it may well be the case that we see more players doing what the French striker Guignac's done, who's ripped up in Mexico for the last 5 years, going over and playing in Mexico, Argentina, Brazil, and playing in a Copa Libertadores. And for instance, I would imagine there's a number of European players that would love the opportunity to go and play for a club like Boca Juniors or Santos, if they could pay their wages, and this might lead to that being the case.
Yeah, Tony, one of my all-time sort of favourite strikers is the French lad Gignac, who went to a Mexican club. But we have an island mentality here, don't we? We don't see many of our players going and playing in these exotic territories. We have reached time. I want to thank everybody for their contribution. Tony, before we do go, I want you to tell people about the next Doing Business in series that we're doing with the European Football Agents Association.
Yeah, so it's an ongoing series that we've been asked to host. It was a real honour actually for myself and Ryan to be asked to host it for the European Football Agents Association. So it's their gig. We're on now part 4. We've done part 1, doing business in Germany. Part 2 was Spain. We did Portugal in December, which was a really good one. And the next one is the Doing Business in the USA webinar, which it's going to be a couple of weeks' time on a Thursday afternoon. So it's going to be a 2:30 kickoff in the UK. I think that's about 9:30 in America, in East Coast America. So we'll get some American people on it. So it would be great to have you on that. It says it's a guide for football agents, but really sports lawyers, people who are in the football industry. I know Steve's given us a little bit of an insight into how MLS works, and it'll be useful to pick on his brains as well. But you know, it's a real chance to fully understand a 90-minute webinar just about how you do business in the States. And particularly tricky is obviously the MLS, which I know Steve's alluded to. So that's you're all invited to that. I'll send out the invites after this webinar, and hopefully you can join us for that. And if you can't make that, obviously we've got Ramm in the meantime, and then we'll have another football transfer forum on the first Thursday in February. But thanks, Ryan. Thanks for that.
Yeah, guys, Steve, Guy, David, Ramm, thanks for your time this morning. Some great feedback there. Really appreciate it. And to everybody, thank you for tuning in. Some really good numbers today. And of course, it goes without saying, everybody look after themselves. And Guy, I can't wait for you to WhatsApp me some pictures of